After years of my brother managing family funds, he vanished, leaving me and Mom in turmoil. I found him hiding, invested our money, vanished again, and now, months later, we're still in a hotel with our lives in chaos. How could he betray us like this? Hello, I have come across this situation and thought it might be helpful to express the burdensome emotions I have regarding this ongoing issue, which has affected me for nearly 2 years. I genuinely believe it is influencing my ability to communicate clearly and is impacting my mental well-being, as well as my overall life experience. If you choose to take the time to read this, I appreciate it and want to mention that I may not be the most skilled storyteller or capable of articulating the events clearly, as I feel my mind has begun to suppress some of the memories. The individuals involved in this situation are my older brother and me, both of us in our 20s, along with my mother, who is in her 60s. Our father passed away in 2017. This situation began in November 2023 when my brother left home, as he typically does to work on our family's property located out of town. His routine of leaving for a few months and then returning home for a couple of weeks has been common since our father passed away. My brother assumed his responsibilities within the family and at work during that time. I have been working as a freelancer since 2019, and for several years, my brother has been the primary provider for our household. However, he has fallen behind on various payments, and I have often covered these expenses. Prior to this, my mother and I attempted to reach him through phone calls and messages, also asking the staff at the property about his whereabouts, but he went missing in action. The staff informed us that he was supposedly in our hometown, yet we could not locate him. Furthermore, my relatives from my father's side were also searching for him, leading to accusations that he had allegedly misappropriated the family's money. He had been handling family matters, including properties and important documents, since we were in the process of selling several of them and completing renovations. We initially disregarded their claims until my aunts and uncle began hurling derogatory names at us, particularly targeting my mother, accusing her of failing to raise her son properly. This deeply affected my mother, ignited her anger, and ultimately led her to sever ties with my father's family. Simultaneously, there was a situation arising from my mother's side of the family. To provide some context, prior to my grandmother's passing, she arranged for a house for my mother, which is the home where I grew up, as well as 2 apartment units for my aunt. However, all these properties are registered under my aunt's name, as she is more financially stable compared to my mother. In the present, since my father has passed away, my brother and I inherited some money. My aunt and her daughters summoned us for a meeting, demanding we pay a sum of money for the transfer of title of the house's certificate because her husband is nearing retirement. She argued that her family is not reliant on inheritance like my brother, and I are due to my father's family connections. I did not agree with this demand because I never asked for any of this, and no amount of money could replace the loss of my father. However, I felt pressured and chose not to voice my dissent. In mid-2023, my brother and I arranged to renovate our house as we felt it unsuitable for our aging mother to reside on the 2nd floor. Therefore, we started renting another home while the construction workers began their tasks. This prompted my aunt to see that we had funds for the title transfer and asked us to provide payment to her. By December 2023, my brother contacted my aunt to initiate the transfer of title after having gone missing again, which distressed her to the point of illness. To make a long story short, he misled my aunt by only paying her 10% of the total amount, proceeding with the title transfer, and then disappearing, resulting in my aunt and cousins directing insults towards my mother and me. From November 2023 to February 2024, our phones were incessantly buzzing. It escalated to the point where we received messages every few days to once a week. During this period, I took on the responsibility of financing my mother and our household, cutting down on various expenses to accommodate my financial constraints, and my mother understood. Around March-April 2024, I began searching through my brother's iPad that he had left at home. Unfortunately, he had numerous emails with only one of them linked to the iPad. I could extract some bank transactions from the email, but lacked comprehensive details. One day, I discovered a hotel reservation made through a booking application. The location was out of town, about an hour-and-a-half drive, so I went there and found him. After inheriting money following my father's death, I was young and struggling with substance abuse and alcoholism, which led me to feel I could not manage the funds. Thus, I asked my brother to hold the money for me, with the understanding that I could request it if needed, and he agreed. That money, combined with his own portion, was invested in a dubious land deal, of which 70% is currently under restriction, while the remaining 30% was deposited into the bank and can only be accessed in December 2024. Additionally, the pandemic severely affected businesses globally, particularly in the property and hospitality sectors, which hindered his business operations. Furthermore, flooding damaged the bridge on our property, creating a need for renovation funds. Consequently, he was in a precarious position financially. In response, he rented out several of our properties to private owners for a term of 6-12 months to maintain cash flow. Unfortunately, my aunt from my father's side discovered this situation, refused to listen to him, and evicted all the tenants before their contracts ended, resulting in my brother owing them money. To avoid involving my mother and me, he chose to escape. I confronted him, stating, "The money you invested and deposited, half of it does not belong to you, and I want it returned." I was deeply hurt. As our yearly rental period neared its end in late July 2024, my mother had already begun to pack up most of our belongings to return to our house when my brother unexpectedly appeared and announced that he was extending the rental agreement until October 2024. His initial intention was to extend it until December 2024, coinciding with the liquidation of the deposits. However, my mother's pride was wounded due to taunts from my aunt and uncle questioning the ownership of our house, which prompted her to yearn for a return to her own home. Once he returned, he resumed contributing to household expenses, which alleviated some of my frustrations. As October 2024 approached, when we planned to finalize our move, we discovered that many of our items had been taken by the contractors. My brother had not made full payments for months, and they were furious, taking our belongings to their storage facility. We stayed in a hotel while negotiating with the constructors, trying to determine how to retrieve our things. Days turned into weeks, and eventually months passed, all filled with uncertainty and deceit from my brother. He would say one thing, only for it to turn out differently. He refused to share any information, isolating both my mother and me while accusing us of interfering. December 2024 arrived, and I anxiously awaited the liquidation of the deposit. My brother and I reached out to the bank to inquire about when the funds would be transferred to his account and how long the process would take. As the date approached, my mother was under intense stress. My brother expressed that he disliked his mother's insistence on monitoring the bank daily and chose to withhold the funds in his account, asserting that we could simply ask him if we needed money. I reiterated my demand for what was rightfully mine, but he continued to say, later. We began to suspect that perhaps there was no money in the account at all. What I imagined would be the conclusion of this ordeal in December 2024 has now extended to February 2025, and we remain in the hotel with only the 7 sets of clothing we packed on moving day. My brother mentioned that he was waiting for his money from the land investment, which was expected in mid-February. I truly do not know what to think or what to hope for anymore. I have experienced a roller coaster of emotions, crying, shouting, pleading, calming down, becoming angry again, remaining hopeful, and then losing hope, repeating this cycle endlessly for months. I have not left with my mother, not only because I believe it would be unwise, but also due to a lack of funds. I have considered every potential solution, but they all lead back to my brother, resulting in a dead end. My mind is chaos, filled with reflections on past memories shared with him, given that our parents were heavy addicts, and I struggle to understand how he could betray me like this. I constantly contemplate our present predicament and worry about when this situation will finally come to a close. I suppose that wraps it up. I apologize for the lengthy message and any disjointed thoughts, as English is not my first language. Thank you for taking the time to read this to the end and for the platform to express my feelings. I feel somewhat relieved. A lesson learned: you can only place your trust in yourself. Story 2. Kicked my brother out after he disrespected my family and blew off helping me. Total shocker. He chose to leave over helping. Hello, everyone. I have been listening for a long time but have never called in before. This might be a bit lengthy, so please bear with me. In September, my brother, who is 42 years old, lost his high-paying job in Florida. He took about a month off to relax and then began searching for a new position. In November, I suggested he come stay at our home. It is important to note that I have a disability. I face numerous physical challenges and often require assistance. He was fully aware of this fact, but he tended to dismiss it whenever my husband, who is 39, or I brought it up during our conversations. We have spoken almost daily for the last decade, maybe even longer. He knew about the accident that left me injured, the various surgeries, the persistent pain, and everything else involved. However, whenever I mentioned struggling with something, it was often brushed aside with an attitude of, "I don't get why you think it's so challenging." For instance, when my husband jokingly mentioned that I had not done the dishes, my brother remarked, "It doesn't make any sense, just do them. It literally takes 5 minutes, just get it done." During our discussion about his moving in, I specifically made it clear that I didn't want his financial contributions. Rather, I sought his assistance with daily tasks doing dishes, helping maintain the fireplace, cleaning up after himself, and so on. Just basic support, you know. To provide some context, we lived together from 2009 to 2011. He was an excellent roommate, and we got along wonderfully. When I became pregnant and was abandoned by my child's father, who left just a week after we found out the news and has not been in touch since I experienced severe illness throughout my pregnancy. During that time, my brother picked up some of my household duties and provided substantial help. Now, fast forward to mid-January. He came to stay with us, but during his time here, he did not wash a single dish, took out the trash only once, began drinking heavily by 10 or 11 a.m., and continued until he became ill. He would isolate himself in his room, looking at his phone for hours at a time. I'm not judging, I'm also often on my phone. His attitude was another issue. He acted as if he understood everything perfectly. He feigned ignorance and lied frequently. He even told my son that it was strange to call your parents ma'am and sir. You should really stop. To which my son, feeling uncomfortable, came to me after and expressed his discomfort with his uncle's comments. That was the first red flag. Not wanting my brother to know my son confided in me, we agreed to act a scenario in which I would get mad at my son for something that he supposedly did while my brother was present. I would let my brother know that I was unaware of where he learned such poor manners, but once I figured it out, he would not be welcome around anymore. My brother finally admitted he had told my son to drop the formalities, at which point I sent my son away just as my husband entered the room. My husband and I grew up in strict households. My upbringing involved my father and stepmother, and he was raised by his mother along with grandparents and aunts. In contrast, my brother was raised by our mother, who struggled with substance abuse, and he dropped out of school at one point. Although he eventually earned his GED and bachelor's degree, he has faced some legal issues, leading to a very different upbringing compared to us. When we addressed this behavior, we approached it with empathy, hoping to have an open conversation. However, he dismissed our concerns, claiming he was merely joking and that we needed to lighten up since it wasn't a serious matter. Last Sunday, we initiated a conversation about laundry. Due to inconsistent weather, we hadn't been able to go to the laundromat. The plan was for my husband to stay with our sick child while my brother and I went to do the laundry. I cannot manage this task on my own due to the weight of the items and the pain it causes me, so my brother was supposed to help. Over the weekend, we discussed it, but the weather turned snowy again on Tuesday, preventing us from leaving. Yesterday, I messaged him at 9 a.m. to let him know I would be leaving around 11 a.m. to get everything done, as it typically takes about 3 hours with an additional hour for grocery shopping. Usually, my son accompanies me to assist with the lifting, and I compensate him fairly a total of $20 for laundry and a tasty lunch. In the same spirit, I messaged him again at 9:41 a.m. to check if he was ready, knowing that if I didn't reach out, he would not begin preparing. He replied, "I'm not." "That's fine, there's still over an hour to prepare." At 10:56 a.m. I texted, "Almost time to go, are you ready?" He responded, on the phone. I decided to wait another half hour before checking in again. His reply this time was, "If you want to take mine, you can, but I already said I wouldn't be ready." "Sorry, sweetheart." He is aware that I cannot handle this alone. Upon my arrival, there was only one other person present at the laundromat. I stood at the back of the truck, trying to figure out how to lift the heavy bags. A kind man offered his assistance, and I realized I had no choice but to accept help from a stranger. He turned out to be very friendly. I'm always cautious at first, as you can never be too sure, and he stayed after finishing his own tasks to help me load the truck back up. Throughout this, I was texting my husband for safety, keeping him updated regarding my whereabouts and progress. While my husband does not require this, I appreciate his support, just in case anything were to occur, a wreck or getting lost. If I have not reached out within 2 hours, I expect him to check in to ascertain my safety. It's something I prefer, slight digression aside. At this point, after about 2.5 weeks of my brother staying with us, he had helped gather firewood 3 times, though he was a nuisance the entire time, taken out the trash once, never washed a single dish, distracted me while I was studying for my master's degree, attempted to discipline my child unnecessarily, disturbed our sleep, did not assist us in the search for our missing dog, and made rude, inappropriate, or mean comments, all while passing them off as mere humor. I know I am likely forgetting various details. He exhibited a constant level of sarcasm and disrespect. When we attempted to address his behavior calmly, he would resort to more smartass remarks. Following the laundry incident, my husband finally reached his breaking point. My brother began to provoke the situation, being even more rude than usual and interrupting us to speak. After 2 hours of him talking back, I presented him with a choice: he could either help and stay or choose to leave. He opted to leave, so I called him pathetic and exited the room. My husband looked ready to confront him, honestly. My brother maintained eye contact, lying through his teeth, and then tried to brush it off as being forgetful. He always has an excuse for his actions and was smirking while being deceitful. In general, I consider myself to be quite patient. However, I do not tolerate those who choose to lie to me. My mother is a compulsive liar, and she has lied throughout my entire life. Years ago, I decided that I did not want to be that type of person, making a firm commitment to avoid lying, aside from trivial matters like keeping gift surprises. Therefore, while I aim to demonstrate patience, my brother's overt disrespect toward my son and husband, combined with the fact that he was lying directly to me about matters involving me, pushed me over the edge. When he continued on that path, I told him he could leave immediately rather than waiting until morning. So, am I the antagonist in this situation? Summary: my brother was exceedingly disrespectful, leading me to ask him to leave.